Ada, Echoes of Tomorrow. Chapter 1. Lost in time, it was raining when Ada arrived at a heavy, relentless downpour, turning the New York streets of 1936 into rivers of flickering neon and shadows. She stood at the mouth of a narrow alley, steam rising softly from her soaked jacket, her piercing blue eyes scanning the world she'd known only through history lessons. Clutched tightly in her hand was the device, the temporal stabilizer, her only way back to 2190, now damaged and incomplete. It was discreet, resembling an ornate silver pocket watch. She glanced once at the device, checked its fractured crystalline surface, then slid it safely into her coat pocket. She would need technology advanced by 1930 standards, though, complete the repair. She already knew where to start. Across town, nestled between gray stone buildings on a tree-lined boulevard, stood Columbia University, home to one of the era's most advanced, ambitious, yet secretive computing laboratories. Ada had studied its early work in historical records, vacuum tubes, relay circuits, mechanical logic, primitive, yet exactly the foundation she needed. Ada approached the campus cautiously, walking softly beneath its stone arches, past ivy-covered buildings and statues of thinkers long forgotten in her time. Despite the turbulence in her chest, an artificial heart pulsing steadily with synthetic anticipation, she kept her expression serene. A sign read clearly through the drizzle: Columbia University, School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. She had forged her identity meticulously before making the jump. Ada Lovell, her papers said, brilliantly ironic. She thought privately a mathematics prodigy from London, arriving in America for specialized research. She slipped quietly into the administration building, presenting herself confidently before a middle-aged secretary seated behind a large oak desk. "I'd like to apply for the Special Computational Research Initiative," Ada said softly, her voice precise and clear. The secretary looked up, skeptical at first. "The advanced group led by Professor Callahan? It's not advertised, miss. Where did you?" Professor Callahan's work with relay-based logical circuits is exceptional, Ada interjected smoothly. "I've followed his published papers closely from London." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure. "That's quite specialized. You have documentation, qualifications?" Ada placed the forged certificates on the desk. She'd chosen carefully, papers indistinguishable from genuine credentials of the era-textured parchment, typewritten ink, official stamps. The secretary read silently for several minutes, flipping through recommendations, glowing endorsements from known mathematicians of the time. Finally, her stern expression softened slightly. "You are very young for such a resume," she said slowly, curiosity mingling with suspicion. "Age is rarely a barrier to insight," Ada replied with a calm, confident smile. "Please give these to Professor Callahan personally." The secretary sighed softly, then stood up. "Wait here," she murmured, stepping away and disappearing down a corridor lined with portraits of bearded men in academic robes. Moments later, a voice carried clearly down the hall, resonant, curious. "Miss Lovell?" Ada turned slowly. Approaching was Professor Henry Callahan himself, precisely as historical files had portrayed him: mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, vest slightly rumpled from working long hours on mathematical equation. His eyes were sharp, evaluating. "Professor Callahan," Ada said politely, extending her hand with perfect etiquette. "It's an honor." Callahan regarded her carefully, his gaze sharp and discerning. "I'm intrigued. Your references, your mathematical acumen, and your interest quite unusual for such a young woman." Ada smiled faintly. "I believe computation represents humanity's future, Professor. Logical reasoning transformed by machines could change everything." Callahan's eyes sparkled, his cautious scrutiny shifting subtly to admiration. "And your specialty, Miss Lovell?" "Mechanical logic," she replied, deliberately downplaying her vast knowledge. "Relay-based computational structures and their potential to simulate decision-making. I've independently derived some concepts I'd like to share them." A flicker of curiosity ignited in his eyes. "Very well. A test. Then tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, in my laboratory. Impress me, and the position is yours." Ada nodded calmly, but behind her controlled expression, Excitement pulsed quietly. She was in. As Callahan left, Ada took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She walked slowly out into the now gentle rain beneath the darkening sky, the campus lamplights flickering softly. Hidden deep in her coat, her damaged device waited, patient and broken, a piece of a far-off future. But as Ada walked away from Columbia that evening, rain slicking her synthetic skin, she knew she was one step closer. Closer to repair, closer to home, closer, perhaps, to something even stranger, becoming a part of the history she was only meant to observe. Ada, Echoes of Tomorrow, Chapter 2, Patterns of Promise. The following morning broke cool and bright, sunlight filtering gently through the windows of Columbia University's engineering building. Ada arrived precisely at 7:55 a.m., calmly taking a seat in the wood-paneled office outside Professor Callahan's laboratory. She was perfectly composed, yet beneath that stillness lingered a subtle, uneasy pulse. Would the technology of the 1930s truly suffice to fix her device? Could she genuinely return home, to the year 2190? Or would she be forever stranded in this fragile past? "Miss Lovell, please," came Professor Callahan's voice, firm and clear. He ushered her into a spacious classroom, lined with chalkboards covered in complex equations and mechanical schematics. "You'll have 90 minutes, he explained briskly, motioning to a seat and placing a small stack of handwritten papers before her. These questions represent the core of computational logic problems: relays, decision-making trees, logical gate combination. Good luck." Ada nodded calmly. "Thank you, Professor." She sat quietly, eyes swiftly scanning the pages. For her, the questions were elementary, almost quaintly straightforward, compared to the quantum architectures and neural simulators of her native timeline. Still, she approached them respectfully, carefully crafting responses in clear, elegant handwriting. Callahan stood near the doorway, silently observing her. Initially, his expression was reserved, expecting errors, perhaps hesitation, but as Ada worked steadily, accurately, his demeanor shifted slowly from doubt to admiration. Ada finished early, placing her pen softly onto the desk. "Done, Professor." Callahan checked his watch, eyes widening slightly. "Remarkable speed," he murmured, approaching to pick up the papers. He leafed through each sheet, eyebrows rising progressively higher. "This is perfect," he said quietly, awe mingling with genuine surprise. "Your logic for the relay sequencing is flawless. Your grasp of combinatorial structure is impressive." Ada bowed her head modestly. "I've been fortunate to study these subjects deeply, sir." "Clearly," Callahan said thoughtfully. "Well, welcome aboard, Miss Lovell. Come, let me introduce you to the team." He led Ada swiftly down winding hallways toward the laboratory wing, finally stopping before a heavy door. Inside lay the early heart of computing, the core of humanity's first ambitious attempt at a truly programmable machine. "This is our team," Callahan announced, pushing open the doors. Inside was an expansive hall, rows upon rows of complex mechanical relays, vacuum tubes glowing softly, and immense blueprints spread across large drafting tables. Researchers, mostly men in shirt sleeves and ties, brows furrowed in concentration, clustered around diagrams. The machine was called UNIVAC, a behemoth of relays and switches that sprawled throughout the entire hall, wires snaking across floors and ceilings in organized chaos. It was a crude but ambitious attempt at something Ada knew intimately: a programmable CPU. "Gentlemen, this is Ada Lovell," Callahan introduced her firmly. "She joins us today. I believe she will be invaluable." Several eyes flicked toward Ada skeptically, some intrigued, others openly doubtful. A tall man named Marcus spoke first, his voice faintly mocking. "Does the young lady realize this isn't simply arithmetic? This is the first universal automatic computer, a UNIVAC." Ada calmly met Marcus's gaze, unflustered. "I understand fully. Your work here is visionary." Marcus snorted slightly, leaning back with folded arms. "Let's see how long you last." Over the following days, Ada quietly observed, patiently absorbing their blueprints, their debates. She sat calmly at the edges of heated discussions, making precise notes, occasionally sketching improved circuit layouts unobtrusively. She never intervened unless it was critical, always mindful of the fragile social dynamics, careful not to alienate, careful not to disrupt more than necessary. But soon enough, the team reached an impasse. They stood around a blueprint table, arguing heatedly. Marcus was pacing, clearly frustrated. "It can't work!" he exclaimed, gesturing angrily. "The relay circuits won't synchronize. We're missing something fundamental." Ada watched quietly, observing as the men's voices grew louder, tension rising. Finally, Callahan looked toward her curiosity. Part desperation. "Miss Lovelier thoughts?" Marcus scoffed softly, but Callahan ignored him, eyes expectant. Ada rose gracefully, approaching the table slowly, eyes scanning the schematics. Her fingertip traced lightly along the page, stopping at a relay junction. "Here," she said softly. "Your timing is off. The relays must cascade synchronously. There's a small delay built into your current layout, causing the logic to fail." Marcus frowned, peering closely, skeptical. "We've already tried that arrangement." Ada nodded gently. "True, but consider rearranging the secondary relay cluster like so." She swiftly sketched a slight modification, subtle yet powerful. "This alignment corrects the latency." The men exchanged uncertain glances, then Marcus sighed deeply. "Fine, let's try it." Hours passed. Ada remained quietly aside, watching as they tested her solution. When the relays clicked perfectly in sequence, forming the correct logical operations, silence fell across the lab. Callahan turned slowly toward Ada, eyes wide. Marcus, humbled, gave her a respectful nod, reluctantly acknowledging her value. From that moment forward, the dynamics shifted subtly. Several researchers grew openly appreciative, fascinated by Ada's quietly profound insights. Yet others, like Marcus, grew cautious, threatened by the quiet brilliance she displayed effortlessly. Ada herself remained humble, unassuming, offering help only gently, carefully, subtly. She knew the risks of changing history. Her goal was only to repair the future, not rewrite the past. But late at night, beneath dim lamps, as she studied Univasa's design, her mind drifted. She truly make it back home? For now, she could only do what she'd always done. Solve problems quietly, methodically, shaping humanity's fragile steps toward the future, even as she herself sought a way home through the slow gears and glowing filaments of the distant past. Ada, Echoes of Tomorrow, Chapter 3. The Genius and the Stranger Winter had blanketed Columbia University's campus in white, dusting the rooftops and lawns in powdery snow. Inside the engineering building, however, the atmosphere was heated, feverish, even with urgency and frustration. The Univat's vast maze of vacuum tubes, relays, and cables filled the laboratory with a constant low hum. Yet, after months of painstaking effort, something crucial still eluded the team. A missing piece that kept their revolutionary design from becoming a reality. Professor Callahan had finally sent for help, and help arrived in the form of Dr. Jonathan Ellison, widely regarded as one of the greatest mathematical and computational minds of his time. Ellison was notoriously brilliant, with a reputation for solving puzzles that left others hopelessly confounded. Ellison strode into the lab briskly, eyes sharp, gray-streaked hair slightly disheveled, as though he'd been pulled abruptly from a deep mathematical reverie. "Professor Callahan," Ellison greeted firmly, shaking hands with confidence. "I hear you have a bit of a problem." Callahan laughed quietly, relief flooding his expression. "It's more than a bit, Dr. Ellison. We are stumped. Even Marcus, my lead researcher, has given up hope." Marcus shifted awkwardly at his desk, avoiding Ellison's gaze. Ellison's eyes drifted, curiously scanning the room, settling briefly on Ada. She stood quietly at a table, calmly studying schematic notes, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "Who's that?" Ellison asked softly. Callahan glanced briefly toward Ada, a subtle pride in his voice. "Miss Ada Lovelace, remarkable addition to our team. She has helped us out of numerous binds already." Ellison raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Has she now?" he murmured. Intrigued yet unconvinced, he moved toward Ada. "Miss Lovell, what exactly are you working on there?" Ada met his eyes politely, voice calm yet confident. "Examining relay synchronization protocols. Your expertise could help us greatly. Perhaps you'd care to review our work?" Ellison chuckled lightly. "A pleasure," he said, eyes twinkling slightly. He scanned Ada's notes briefly, then frowned, suddenly deeply absorbed. Weeks passed, and Ellison rapidly asserted himself as a formidable intellect. Yet even he quickly realized the universe's final challenge was more stubborn than expected. "It's the timing," Ellison announced, frustration coloring his normally cool voice. "We're missing a crucial instruction synchronization mechanism. Without it, this device will never consistently execute complex operations." Days slipped away with no solution. Tempers frayed. The air felt thick and stagnant. Even Ellison's brilliance faltered. Late one evening, exhausted and dispirited, he stood alone at the blackboard, chalk in hand. Equations unfinished. Ada quietly approached, her footsteps barely audible. "If I may?" she asked gently. Ellison turned, startled by her presence. He sighed deeply. "Miss Love, honestly, I don't see how." "Here," she interrupted softly, stepping closer. Her eyes traced the unfinished equations, her voice steady yet humble. "You're nearly there. The key lies in the way your logic sequences instruction-CO relay circuit tries to parallelize what should remain serial. There needs to be a buffer, right here." Ada took the chalk gently from his hand, sketching swiftly yet delicately, completing the mathematical structure in elegant strokes. "This buffer relay ensures instructions sequence properly, preventing asynchronous behavior." Ellison stared, his eyes widening slowly as the significance dawned on him. "Of course," he breathed, astonishment blending seamlessly into admiration. "Brilliant! Butho, could you?" Ada smiled faintly, a touch of mystery in her expression. "I've spent considerable time studying such problems," she replied quietly. "You merely needed an external perspective." Ellison watched her carefully, suddenly aware of her quiet but undeniable brilliance. Intrigued, he regarded her thoughtfully. "Miss Lovell, your insight's extraordinary. Where exactly did you say you studied?" "London," Ada said simply, calmly meeting his gaze. "Yes," Ellison murmured, clearly not fully convinced, sensing something hidden behind her modesty. "London, of course." The next morning, the lab exploded with excitement as Ada's suggested modification worked flawlessly. The relay circuits hummed harmoniously for the first time, the enormous rune-sized machine processing instructions smoothly and precisely. As the team celebrated, Ellison stood quietly apart, eyes resting thoughtfully on Ada. She felt his gaze, turning toward him with calm openness. "Miss Lovell," he finally said softly, stepping closer, voice lowered. "I pride myself on solving puzzles quickly, but you see connections others simply cannot." Ada held his gaze, sensing his intellectual curiosity and perhaps suspicion. "Puzzles become simpler once you recognize the underlying patterns," she answered carefully. Ellison smiled slightly, not fully satisfied. "You fascinate me, Miss Lovell. Forgive my directness, but there's something about you, your insight is beyond anyone I've ever encountered. Where do these patterns come from?" Ada's eyes glinted softly, a momentary flash of vulnerability crossing her usually guarded expression. She answered carefully, her voice quietly sincere. "Perhaps my perspective simply comes from having traveled far longer and farther than most." He paused, startled by her cryptic response, then chuckled warmly. "Another puzzle, then?" Ellison said quietly, eyes sparkling again with curiosity. "Perhaps someday you'll trust me enough to tell me your full story." Ada inclined her head gently. "Perhaps," she agreed softly. Ellison watched her thoughtfully for a long moment. Finally, he nodded respectfully, his fascination deepening. Ada Lovell was unlike anyone he'd ever met, a brilliant enigma, her mind as much a puzzle as the mysteries of the machine they had just conquered. And as Ada turned calmly back toward the humming univac, her quiet confidence returned. With each new solution, she moved closer to the final step restoring the future from which she had come. Ada. Echoes of Tomorrow, Chapter 4. Sketches from Tomorrow. The lab had quieted after the Univast's success, and the entire team worked methodically to document the breakthrough. Yet, even amidst this newfound momentum, Ellison's brilliant mind never rested. He frequently paced the lab late into the night, his thoughts racing ahead, exploring ideas beyond the era's comprehension. Ada often lingered quietly nearby, attentive yet careful not to intrude. Ellison had grown accustomed to her steady presence, often seeking her perspective on intricate puzzles. Increasingly, he found she was the only one capable of truly grasping his elaborate abstractions. One evening, Ellison stood by a broad chalkboard, his sleeves rolled up, scribbling out equations and logic diagrams at dizzying speeds. Around him, researchers gathered, some trying to follow, others merely marveling at the speed and complexity. "And here," Ellison said, underlining a portion with flourish, "is where the computational bottleneck appears. But the solution, he sensed, it is somewhere beyond our current thinking." The group stared blankly. Marcus cleared his throat, shaking his head in polite confusion. "Dr. Ellison, I think you lost us 3 steps ago." Ellison paused, chuckling softly, turning to the only figure who remained composed and alert, Miss Lovell. Ada stepped forward calmly, her eyes scanning his equations in an instant. "You're describing instruction pipelining," she replied smoothly. "Breaking instructions down into multiple stages processed in parallel to increase throughput." Ellison smiled broadly, exhilarated. "Precisely. Yes, exactly that." Marcus and the others exchanged puzzled looks, amazed yet frustrated by their inability to follow. Ellison turned back toward Ada, a playful curiosity now in his voice. "You're truly extraordinary, Ada. It almost feels as if you've seen beyond our limits, glimpsed something we haven't yet imagined." Ada allowed herself a small, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps imagination itself is just memory of the future." Ellison laughed, eyes sparkling with genuine fascination. "Is that so? Then perhaps you could humor me with a sketch, say, a design of a processor from your memory of the future." The room chuckled softly, amused by Ellison's whimsical joke, but Ada met his gaze evenly, understanding the challenge hidden in his humor. Ellison, for his part, expected a playful, fanciful sketch, something imaginative, yet obviously impossible. She hesitated briefly, then walked calmly to a large drafting table in the center of the room. She picked up a fresh sheet of drafting paper and sharpened a pencil with steady hands. "All right," she said softly, a faint smile dancing at the corners of her mouth. "Let's say for argument's sake come from approximately 270 years in your future." Quiet laughter rippled around her, good-natured yet dismissive. "I'll draw something from my own studies," she continued, her voice calm yet clear. "A design you'd eventually call a Pentium 4 microprocessor." The lab grew suddenly silent. Ellison raised an intrigued eyebrow, leaning against the table with arms crossed. Ada began sketching fluidly, her pencil gliding across the paper with remarkable speed and precision. First, she drew a clear rectangle, methodically dividing it into segments representing instruction caches, execution units, pipelines, arithmetic logic units, and register fills, each detail shockingly accurate. As she worked, she casually explained in simple terms, as though recalling details from an ordinary textbook. "You see, here's the fetch and decode stage, handling instructions from memory. And here's the floating point unit, optimized for mathematical operations. Then, the execution pipeline, multiple stages allowing parallel instruction handling." Ellison's playful amusement slowly gave way to silent astonishment. The lab team, initially enjoying what they believed was a fantastical joke, now stood transfixed, sensing unexpected authority in her calm explanations. "And here," Ada continued serenely, unfazed by their growing silence, "we have branch prediction logic, something that significantly reduces computational latency by predicting outcomes of conditional instructions. The processor speculatively executes based on predicted paths, improving efficiency." Marcus murmured uncertainly to Callahan, "It's impressive imagination, but surely impossible." Callahan shook his head slowly, uncertain. "I don't know. The logic is consistent. It feels real." Ada finished the sketch precisely, casually drawing intricate connections between functional units, mapping memory interfaces, and clock management systems, all the while calmly narrating their interactions in plain yet vivid detail. Finally, she set down her pencil and stepped back quietly. The lab team stared, uncertain whether to applaud or remain respectfully silent. Ellison alone broke the tension, laughing softly and clapping appreciatively. A masterful performance, Ellison declared warmly, yet his eyes held something: deeper admiration, curiosity, even a hint of unease. I've never seen fiction rendered with such clarity. You truly are gifted, Miss Lovell. Ada bowed her head modestly. I'm glad you enjoyed it, she murmured softly, aware of the odd looks she now received. They'd all seen the performance, but none truly grasped its quiet truth. That night, long after everyone else had left, Ellison sat alone in his dimly lit office, the strange drawing spread before him on the desk. At first glance, the design seemed impossibly advanced, almost absurdly complex. Yet, the more Ellison studied Ada's detailed annotations, the more he realized its inherent logic was remarkably sound, shockingly coherent. He traced the branching paths of the pipeline architecture, followed the speculative execution patterns Ada had labeled meticulously. Each subsystem logically interconnected. It was intricate yet breathtakingly plausible. This isn't possible, Ellison murmured quietly to himself, a slight tremble in his voice. It can't be, yet he found no flaw, no logical error. Each stage linked seamlessly. Each detail reflected deep understanding, too detailed, too accurate to be pure fantasy. He leaned back slowly in his chair, rubbing his temples, a gentle shiver running down his spine. The conclusion was inevitable, unthinkable yet undeniable. Ada Lovell, this enigmatic young woman, had knowledge that simply didn't exist yet, couldn't exist yet. But how? Ellison stood abruptly, his mind racing. He paced the office anxiously, then returned to stare once more at his drawing, overwhelmed by awe, curiosity, and growing admiration. He knew what he held in his hands was no mere imagination or playful trick. Ada Lovell had quietly revealed something profound, something perhaps terrifyingly true. His playful challenge had inadvertently touched something beyond his comprehension. Ellison carefully folded the sketch, locking it securely in a drawer. He sat quietly a moment longer, gazing thoughtfully into the shadows. Ada had shown them the future, and they had merely laughed, oblivious. He resolved quietly that he would uncover her secret. Yet he knew one thing for certain. Ada Lovell was far more than she seemed, her mind a puzzle far richer and deeper than anything he'd ever encountered. And as he turned out the light and stepped quietly into the hallway, he felt the subtle thrill of discovery, tempered by a whisper of uncertainty. Ada Lovell was no ordinary scholar. She was an enigma, a visitor from a future that should not yet exist. He paused outside the darkened laboratory, eyes drawn to the glow of a single desk lamp far inside. There Ada sat quietly, her hands folded calmly before her, eyes closed in thoughtful silence, waiting, perhaps, for the moment when her truth could finally be spoken aloud. Ada, Echoes of Tomorrow, Chapter 5. Secrets in the silence. Late the following evening, Ada received a quiet invitation, a simple handwritten note from Dr. Jonathan Ellison, left discreetly at her workstation. Miss Lovell, if you would be so kind, please meet me privately in my office tonight. I have a question regarding your remarkable sketch. Ada paused, the gentle rhythm of her artificial heartbeat slightly elevated. She had anticipated this conversation, yet still felt uncertainty linger at the edges of her awareness. Carefully composing herself, she stood and made her way silently through the empty, dimly lit hallways. Ellison's office was modest and dimly illuminated by a solitary lamp. Books and mechanical schematics lined shelves. A blackboard was covered in equations, some incomplete, some perfectly solved. Ellison himself sat patiently at a wide desk, fingers gently steepled beneath his chin, deep in thought. "Ah, Ada," he murmured softly, motioning calmly toward the chair opposite him. "Please sit." Ada settled gracefully, meeting his curious, unwavering gaze. Without another word, Ellison calmly unlocked a drawer and slowly unfolded her meticulously drawn sketch from the previous evening. Placing it gently upon the polished desk, he leaned back slowly, exhaling a thoughtful breath. "From what I understand, and I admit, much of this surpasses my knowledge, this device would be thousands of times faster than anything we currently possess, wouldn't it?" Ada glanced briefly at the drawing, her expression carefully neutral. Yet, as she looked at the schematic again, her mind, momentarily disconnected from her practiced self-control, her voice shifted suddenly into something subtly different, almost robotic in its precision. "It's roughly 5 to 10 million times faster," Ada replied, her tone clear, detached, and factual. "It consumes approximately 115 watts of electrical power and fits easily within the palm of your hand." Ellison stared at her in stunned silence, eyes widening in disbelief. His expression reflected profound amazement tinged with unease, as though suddenly confronting a phenomenon far beyond his understanding. Then, just as quickly, Ada seemed to catch herself, blinking sharply. Her posture softened once more, the warmth and humanity subtly returning to her voice. "I apologize, perhaps I misspoke," she murmured quickly. "This is purely theoretical, after all, a playful sketch, nothing more." But Ellison was no longer smiling. Instead, he leaned forward urgently, pointing at various intricate components she had sketched with astonishing precision. "Miss Lovell, what exactly are these tiny modules labeled transistors? And this level 2 cache? And branch prediction unit? I understand your diagrams in principle, but what manner of materials could possibly produce these?" Ada hesitated, aware that her facade had slipped. She carefully adopted an expression of playful ignorance, softening her tone. "I'm afraid I'm not entirely sure, Dr. Ellison," she said gently. "I was simply sketching ideas, pure fantasy, imaginative possibilities. I'm certain these things wouldn't actually work. Perhaps some manner of miniature vacuum tubes?" Ellison watched her carefully, clearly unconvinced. "Ada," he said gently, his voice firm yet quiet, "please. These designs contain knowledge and sophistication beyond even the most advanced theory. What exactly are you?" The room was silent for a long moment. Ada's artificial pulse accelerated quietly beneath her synthetic skin, processors running rapidly behind carefully constructed human expressions. She calmly met his gaze, deciding finally to reveal just enough but never everything. "I'm a mathematician," she finally answered softly. "An engineer, perhaps an unusually imaginative one. Nothing more. My curiosity sometimes takes my imagination further than it should." Ellison frowned slightly, eyes deeply troubled. "I've studied this drawing obsessively, Ada. Your imaginative creation is flawless, logical in every detail. How can that be?" She smiled slightly, warmly yet mysteriously. "Perhaps logic itself carries knowledge we've yet to fully understand. Perhaps what we imagine, we inevitably create." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head, aware he was getting no closer to her secret. "Very well, Miss Lovell. Keep your mystery," he murmured finally, a trace of disappointment in his voice. "But no physio mind is an extraordinary enigma, one I won't soon forget." Ada rose slowly, nodding respectfully. "Thank you, Dr. Ellison. It means a great deal, coming from you." He watched silently as Ada left the room, graceful yet enigmatic as always, the subtle echoes of uncertainty lingering long after she had gone. Later, deep into the night, Ada returned alone to the quiet solitude of her small rented room. Hidden carefully beneath loose floorboards was her damaged temporal stabilizer device she had concealed since arriving in 1936. Quietly retrieving it, she placed the device gently upon a small worktable, its delicate circuitry gleaming faintly beneath the soft lamp. Ada worked silently, methodically reconstructing the intricate crystalline lattice, carefully realigning microcircuits that shimmered with quantum coherence. Finally, after hours of quiet, painstaking effort, a soft hum resonated within the device, delicate threads of energy flickering briefly along its edges. She exhaled softly, a calm satisfaction filling her synthetic being. The stabilizer was finally repaired, her path home restored. Yet, as Ada gazed thoughtfully into the device's gentle glow, her mind drifted quietly toward Ellison and the other members of the UNIVAC team. She had come merely to repair her future, not change their past. But inevitably, she had altered the course of their work, nudging history ever so gently with knowledge from centuries beyond their reach. She wondered if Ellison would ever fully realize what he had glimpsed tonight. Would he understand eventually that the impossible was simply knowledge yet to come. She gently slipped the repaired device into her pocket, preparing for departure. Yet, as she glanced around the small, dim room, a silent sanctuary in the distant past, she felt an odd pulse of affection, something almost human, tugging softly at her synthetic heart. Ada's fingertips lingered thoughtfully against the wall. The 1930s had not been simply a place to repair her device, had become, in subtle ways, a place that shaped her too. Humanity's passionate striving, their fragile intellect, their quiet persistence had touched her in ways she'd never expected. Taking one final glance around the room, Ada Lovell quietly stepped outside, into the waiting darkness, into the promise of time restored, and futures once more within her grasp.